Welcome to the Find and Follow podcast, where we are all about helping you find and follow Jesus in your everyday life. I'm Scott Langhans, your host, joined by Craig and Kyle, the co-host today, and we are kicking it on a nice, sunny summer Wednesday. And don't come at me with the technical, it's not summer yet.
No, I'm full on. Okay. I'm with you.
I'm full on with you.
I was in summer mode like when it got nice 3 weeks ago.
Somebody tried to come at me with springtime the other day. I was like, no, stop. Don't. I get you. We got 5 more days or whatever, but
when I can stay out and mow the lawn till 9:30, it's summer.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But kids, we were driving home last night. It was 9:18, and White goes, "Did the sun go down already?" Yeah, it went down. He's like, "It's really light out." Yep, it sure is.
Yep.
But we're enjoying the sun. I want to jump into something. We're going to talk about it. You reap what you sow. Galatians, where we've been in our conversation of what it means to follow Jesus. In chapter 5 and 6, really, this kind of overarching theme of like, whatever you're doing in your life today will show up later. And what you're planting in your life, you get to reap that fruit, whether it's great or not so great. And so just wanted to chat a little bit. This last weekend, we had Transition Sunday, the lead pastor role. And I think a lot of different things, but I think one of the things was, hey, both you guys have been sowing for decades, literally, and you got to reap some of that fruit. And I think it showed up on Sunday. And as you guys are flipping the page to the new chapter, as you're turning one more time around the carousel, as you're, I don't know what other metaphors.
Keep finding metaphors.
There. But you get to show up in these moments and these seasons and go, oh, hey, why is all of this happening? Why are all these like people like standing and cheering and saying nice things and bringing gifts and cards and people tuning in, people flying from out of state? Why is all that happening? It's seasons and decades of sowing good stuff in your life and helping other people, sowing seeds, and then you get to reap that fruit. So talk about your experience a little bit. We've talked about it on the podcast, and I know you guys have talked about it probably a lot in your personal life with people, but what was your guys' experience like?
Me.
Either one of you on the couch over there. There's just 2 of you, and
and I think just to add to your to what you're saying, I think this transition process has been a 2-year transition process, and we have been sowing really intentionally the whole way through that process, which leads to, I told my wife on Sunday, hey, this is where we just get to cash the check. Hey, try not to be stressed out, try not to overthink it, try not to have a bunch of expectations, because today is harvest day. We were harvesting the transition process that Craig had poured a lot into, even before we even decided retirement and even before the 2 years. Our leadership team, our council, our staff, really intentionally sowing through the next season. What does the next chapter for Mission Church look like? What does this next season look like? So for me, I tried to just enjoy it. I've been telling people I tried to keep my expectations low because I didn't know what to expect, but I was blown out of the water just by what God did, how the people responded, the enjoyment factor, the celebratory factor. It was phenomenal. I went back and watched it online because it felt a little bit like, when you go to your wedding and you don't know what happened when you leave. You're like, okay, who was there? It was a blur. Like, I remember my wedding, people were like, oh man, the food was so good. I was like, oh yeah, I didn't eat enough. I was hungry. And that's
why we come to weddings, for the free food. Yeah. So when it's your wedding, you go to that wedding for a different reason. The rest of us are like, when's the food starting?
So I went back and watched it, and again, just was overwhelmed with the whole thing, the way people responded. Again, our staff support, our denomination with Foursquare and Dave Edler, what he did and said, and the meaningfulness of it, and just phenomenal. And again, reaping not only that 2-year transition, but 19 years of my life really serving Mission Church in different contexts, and 20-some years of serving Jesus and following him to what's next and developing who I am, who he wants me to be, following his calling for my life. It was a fun day it was harvest season to just reap all that seeds that had been sown.
Yeah. Craig, what was your experience like now that we're on the other side of this long journey here?
Yeah. It was fabulous. I was listening to Kyle talk about it, and I could echo a lot of the same sentiments. It was really a wonderful moment. One of the things that struck me about it was the fact that it was more than just ceremony. And we made and ceremony by itself would have been meaningful. It had value. In fact, that was part of the short message that Kyle brought, and that we intentionally wanted to emphasize the value of ceremony, of taking time to memorialize key events in our lives. And so we knew it would be that, and that part of it would be meaningful, and it was. But then there was another layer. There was another very real spiritual dynamic. Both Cindy and I just felt like this was the Lord just gracing the moment, and I don't want it to sound over spiritualized, but like shifting the mantle.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that's over. I think that's just appropriate.
Yeah, it's very subjective, is what I'm getting at. But both Cindy and I felt like this is happening right now in this moment. The shift is taking place. Now, internally, we made a decision. You started leading in January. In May, early in May, Foursquare made a decision and appointed you the lead pastor. And those are real things. But then there was another very real something that took place in the moment on Sunday that without it, the other two would not have the depth of meaning that they now have.
Yeah, and I think part of what was happening on Sunday, it was just the larger community was involved. So all of us, as a big family called Mission Church, as part of the body of Christ, we were people were more engaged than they ever have been in the process, and we've talked about this, I think, on the podcast pretty heavily. It's just the value of, hey, there's significant moments in life, and we cruise through them way too fast these days. We don't celebrate well enough. We don't honor people like we should. We don't grieve and mourn properly like we should, I think. And again, real generalized. Some people do really great at all of those. And then on Sunday, we were able to honor, and we were able to celebrate, and we were able to have this ceremonial part. And I heard so many people, because I think, again, like you guys said, they didn't know what to expect. Had a lot of people like, well, is it going to be just longer? They're thinking logistics. Is there going to be more time, or what is this going to be like? Because we haven't been part of this a lot in our culture. We don't pause as America. We don't pause for a week and take a week off as a culture and do pilgrimages and have ceremonial things. And so it was good. People, the reference points were weddings. They felt like I went to a wedding, and because that's the only other real major ceremonial thing we have. We have graduations. It's graduation season. Those are good. Hey, I finished high school. I know, because I went for 3 hours and there was a thing.
I was going to say, those are a little bit more boring and not as fun celebrating for everybody else in the audience.
Yes.
And even, I don't know if every high school grad or college grad has this experience, but I remember even at my own, I was like,
can we get
this
out of
isn't
here?
fun. Cool, I flipped the tassel thing. Yay, I'm done.
When does the food start? Was
Yeah.
my thought. Can we get out of here? So it was a fun day. It was real honoring. People came and witnessed it and were part of it that are not Jesus people, that are not, but they're friends, they're supporting. And I think it was real cool for a lot of those folks just to see how we loved one another as Christ loves us, and it was a witness to them that these people do genuinely care for one another. They honor each other. They're celebrating, and they could tell it wasn't fake or made up. And it gave, like Jesus said, hey, how you love one another will be the witness to the world. We don't have to make it so complicated. Sometimes we get all over the front of the skis on how do I witness to the world? You just love people really well around each other, and it's really evident to others. And so I think that was a major thing that was happening on Sunday.
Another thing for me personally on Sunday was the fact that as I reflected back over these decades, for me personally, it was the only transition of its kind in my life. I left Bible college to go off and be part of a church in Los Angeles, and I didn't get sent off by my church. I didn't get received well by the other church down there. Then I went off to start a church in Bellingham and have had several transitions. none of those transitions, either on the sending or receiving side of that dynamic, was anything close to what this was, even when I first came to this church. So yeah, this was a huge contrast to all of those transitions, and I think it was a group effort. A lot of people had a part in it. I think we did it right.
Absolutely. And I think, I think you had a couple of factors. Just both of your guys' longevity here led into it, right? After 35 years, we send out an email and say one tweet and that's
See
it.
ya.
Thanks. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. You know what I mean? That would be so weird. So to do it right and have a party and celebrate with people, and I think that would be, and it's so much easier for an internal transition than someone that's brand new who would be moving to town this last week or came to town a couple weeks ago and had 3 weeks to overlap. So much more personal, and the way we did it would be right for an internal transition. So one of the things that Paul was getting at in chapter 5 and 6 in this letter to Galatians, he's saying, hey, don't become weary. This is 6:9. Don't become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. And he's talking about our faith, and he's talking about big picture and overall and being with Christ for eternity. But I think in the shorter side, in seasons of our life, and people listening in can relate to this, that we just see the fruit a lot of time in other people's lives. Oh, there you go, Craig. Wow, that's awesome. Great. And people really appreciate and honor you. And we had a party, and there you go. There is 35 years here, plus all the other places and churches and ministry for 44 years or whatever it's been. And there's a lot of times where you're it gets weary. There's a lot of hard work. We, as a culture, just love the highlights, the social media, the headlines of superstar, go number one. We don't see the back end. We don't see the work. On a spiritual metaphor level, we don't really get to see all the underground work that God's doing in our hearts and our lives to build a foundation or build the roots. Pick your own metaphor on that one, whatever you want. We just see this ooh, there's fruit. Awesome. Cool. So what's been helpful for you guys in those seasons of hey, don't give up. Don't become weary in doing good. Don't become weary in loving God and loving people, so that you can get to a spot where there's even more fruit. And God's so good at this there's a spiritual multiplication factor. Anytime you're planting a seed, it's God at work doing the growing, and it's God at work doing the multiplication. When we plant one zucchini plant in the summer, you get 4 trillion zucchinis, and right, and around these parts, late August, early September, people are hey, you want a bag of zucchinis? Hey, how about you? You want a bag of zucchinis?
I've actually seen zucchini sitting out at the end of the driveway with a sign that says free.
Yes, and that's from a one plant. So there's this practical world of one tomato plant, boom, lots of tomatoes. One zucchini plant. But on the spiritual level, when we plant good things, when we plant following Jesus, loving people, it's not a one-for-one equation, and we're not doing it to get a one-to-one result, but there's a multiplication, and there's a spiritual power at work to make things grow. I may have stole some of your thunder on that question, but what's helpful for you guys in thinking back, to keep going and not to get weary in the doing good with loving God and loving people and serving people well and knowing at the proper time there's a harvest coming.
Yeah, I think ministry specifically, and anything where there's direct relational involvement, has this really easy potential to be very burdensome and very, weary, growing really weary, because people can hurt and we can hurt each other, and it can be difficult dealing with people sometimes. And so ministry is one of those unique opportunities where we're helping people find and follow Jesus. And we joke all the time, and it's a popular saying, well, if it wasn't for the interactions and the people, ministry would be easy. It'd be easy just to do the thing but that's the whole point. And the blessing that God has given me specifically in pastoring people and loving people, it's easy to be weary, but I have to come back to the blessings that God has given me and the call that He has, I believe, given my life. and just continue to go back to faith in Him. Like, God, I believe that you have gifted me. I believe that you are who you say you are, and you did what you said you were going to do, and you are real in my life, and there is a plan and a purpose and a direction that you have for me. And it's a faith step in reminding myself who God is, what God is doing, and that God wants to be on mission with Him. And that's the harvest, right? That's the law of sowing and reaping. It's like the law of gravity. It does happen.
Yeah, you can't argue that and make it just stop.
You can't just be like, no, that's not true. You don't. No, it's a law. Like, what you plant, you will harvest. If you are diligent to put the work in, to water it, work the ground, make it happen, there will be a harvest season. And it's easy to go, oh yeah, but it's so hard. And I had to go out extra today and water it, and I had to take those late night phone calls, and I had some really upset people, and I had to deal with relationships and hardships and hurt feelings, and I had to put in extra work, and I had to till the ground way extra hard this season. And I go, but I have to come back to the point that I truly believe that God will bless the harvest in me, in my own life, in my relationships, in my marriage, in my family. I believe that God will bless the hard work, the sweat, the tears, the blood, because He is the God of the harvest, and I have to trust in Him. When I lean back into thinking I can do it and work harder and be better, that burnout's just that's gonna be the case. So, I mean, it sounds churchy and maybe cheesy, but it has to come back to my faith in the God of the harvest. It's His harvest, and I'm planting for Him, but He blesses me in the process.
One of the things that's helped me over the years, Scott, to your question, is realizing that I have to put my mask on first. The masks that drop out of the
That one. Okay.
is my
Airplane one. All right,
airplane
good.
metaphor.
I didn't
Put your
know.
own
We've had a
mask
lot of
on.
mask talk
Yeah,
the
I
last
was gonna say,
15
the
months.
oxygen mask.
Oxygen mask first.
Gotcha.
In the case of emergency.
In case of an emergency, put your mask on first, because that equips you, empowers you to help those around you if you have a child or whatever. And it's that, in Sunday's ceremony, one of the things that was emphasized was the importance that Kyle would put family first above his ministry, second only to his personal relationship with Christ. And that's part of that ceremony for a reason, because we need to take care of ourselves. Self-care, soul care, it can be taken to an extreme and we become all wrapped up in ourselves. That's not what we're talking about. But far too often in ministry, especially for leaders, we make it so much about other people, we sometimes forget to take care of our own soul. And so remembering that's been helpful to me. Another thing that's been helpful to me, and this is a point at which I identify with Peter, one of my most compelling, most influential passages of Scripture is Peter's conversation with Jesus on the beach. If you love me, tend my lambs. If you love me, feed my sheep. And so in ministry, I've often, when I just wanted to quit, when I was done, when I just didn't feel like I had anything more to give, when I thought, I don't enjoy this, I don't want to do this anymore, and I'd come back to Jesus and just say, where's the door? How do I get out? Where's the exit? And then we'd have a conversation, not unlike his conversation with Peter. Hey, Craig, if you love me, this is what I want you to do, tend my sheep. Well, then you got to give me the grace and the strength. And Jesus always does. And he keeps you going. He fills you up. And so that's been a big part of it for me is I love Jesus. That's why I keep doing this. Another part of it for me is back to your the Lord of the harvest and the fact that you sow in one season and reap in another. You sow one seed, to your point earlier, Scott, and you reap a multiplied amount of harvest. Well, the other thing that's true about the harvest is that you sow in one season and you reap in the next, not in the same season. So I would many times just remind myself that like winter or summer, seasons don't last forever. And so sometimes it was just like, this is a really hard season. I'm not really enjoying this right now, but I do know for a fact. And the farther you go, over the years, the more readily you recognize, hey, seasons don't last forever. This season will pass, and there'll be a time of easier sailing, of more rewarding ministry, or just less stress and pressure, whatever it is. And so if I just hang in there, we'll get there. And it's the same kind of mentality that I use when it's wintertime. Like, the snow's not going to be here forever. Spring will come, because I don't enjoy the winters around here.
Man.
And for me, it's just it's like, I can't wait for this to be over.
Yeah, that's called eternity, when there's no snow and you'll be happy. I think that's the
No,
season
it's called
you'll be
Hawaii
excited.
or
Hawaii. You're
Southern
gonna
California
move to
or-
San Diego, and
Yeah,
there'll be something
exactly.
else.
I love that though, and I spoke a message in our previous message series. I wish I would have listened about this diligence and training, and I made that point that it's the laws of the harvest are not just you reap what you sow, but you reap after you sow. Again, in America and in our world, we want results now. Like, hey, I planted the seed. Where's the food? Right? I did the work. God, where's the blessing?
Mm-hmm.
Like, year one in ministry, like, this is tough. I remember taking over the youth group here at Mission Church, and I was like, this is not what I thought youth ministry was. And I was just in a different season, and the youth ministry was amazing, and we were flourishing, and this isn't as fun. And I planted a seed, and I'm here, and the next week there wasn't more students. The next week it wasn't more fun. It was still hard. But again, you reap what you sow, but you reap after you sow. And then the last one, like you referenced, Scott, you reap more than you sow. You plant one seed and it reaps, with the Lord's blessing and help, it reaps a humongous harvest. And so we have to remember those laws, and I think they're encouraging, but they're also beneficial in helping us remember the process, that it isn't instantaneous. It is going to take some work. It's worth it, and with God's blessing and with God's help and with God's favor, it's totally worth it, and it's bountiful in Him.
Yeah, because people's lives are at stake. Eternities are at stake. The enjoyment of being made in the image of God and living on the planet Earth like Jesus intends us to, with joy and peace and patience and kindness and full of the Spirit and life. Like, that's what's at stake for people. It's not just a thing, a service or a gathering or a program or an event, but it's helping people find Jesus and their lives to be changed. And those seasons are shorter, but it's tough in the times, And so for me, like, literally the gardening metaphor, we're gardeners at our house. I don't know how I got to be a gardener, but like, I started growing tomatoes when I was high school, which was weird, I think, because you and Mom, you're not gardeners. We had like a rose garden, and we'd tend that, but other than that, like, I don't know. I just started growing vegetables, and
I remember.
I don't know. It was kind of weird as like a 15-year-old dude to like have tomato plants, but I did it. I'd make salsa. It was great. Anyway, so I've always gardened. This year we're gardening, and my wife Amy is leading the charge on the gardening. She had a neighbor cat, we still do, who would come in the.
We had a neighbor cat.
I know. She does wish there was a hat on that, but she planted. So you do all that hard work. You work the ground. You pick the weeds. You get the rocks out. Brought in some fresh dirt. Mixing it up. You get all the seed. You make the rows. All that laborious work, and there's no fruit in that season. It's a little more tedious. It's dirtier. And planted it all, watered it. You got to watch it real carefully those first few days and make sure it's got just enough water. And she planted some squash and some other things, and come back out, and the neighbor cat had come and dug around in like half the garden. Yeah, she was fired up. She was like, "Boys, get your guns, shoot the thing!" Like, it was neighborhood war, and it was like I think it's a newer cat to our neighborhood, which I don't know how that's legal. You can just let your cat out; it can roam around and poop in my garden and dig it up. But if my dog barks 2 times, my neighbors call the cops on me. So, anyways, there's a little dog cat.
Scott venting a little bit.
Yeah. Anyways, so she had to put netting over the garden. Then she came out a couple days later and had dug up one of the zucchini plants and just like thrown it to the side and just pooped right in the middle of the fresh dirt there. And so she's at war with this cat. And, she had to replant half the garden, and stuff's popping up. She's like, "Oh, I guess I planted this and this row and that and partial." And it's just, we're not even sure exactly what's coming up now because the seeds got all mixed around and everything. But stuff's starting to come up, but it's just, like, to try to bring that metaphor real practically, there's the enemy of our soul who is out to get us in those seasons, who is not wanting
Cats
things
are the
to
devil.
flourish.
That is the direct comparison you're making.
Well,
Spawn of Satan,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, cats and gophers.
Yes, and marmots.
Marmots.
And marmots
ground
and
critters.
moles.
But I don't know. I just think people listening. I was reflecting on that this weekend, and as we're reading through Galatians here, as we're winding down. If you didn't hear last week, we were going to take a summer break. So next week will be the last podcast for a bit, and we're going to take a break and reboot for season 3 in the fall. Seasons are made up, but they're kind of fun. You feel like you're going somewhere doing something, I think, on that. But I was just reading through, and I was like, okay, all of this sowing and reaping, we saw a lot of that evidence on this weekend and celebrating. Even to the point, like for us personally, we celebrated you and Mom 48 years of being married. That's a lot of sowing and reap a harvest, right? And not growing weary and keep continually working on your relationship and say, hey, we made a commitment, we made a ceremonial vow to God and to each other that we're going to do life together until death parts us, like for better, for worse, for in sickness and in health and crazy times and grumpy times and in good times and in connected family times and more disconnected family times and all the above, that we've made that vow, and so we're committed to one another, and therefore you get to celebrate 48 years of being together.
Coming up on a half century here.
And so for me, one of the keys is the life in the Spirit in chapter 5, where Paul's making this point, that it's the power of God at work in our hearts and our lives that allows us to do that. The fruit of the sinful nature is real obvious and evident, and he goes through that the sinful nature desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the sinful nature. They are in conflict with each other. It's cats and dogs again, right there. But so that you do not do what you want. Verse 18 of chapter 5. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. The acts of the sinful nature are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery, idolatry, and witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, and envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. And you look at that and you go, yeah, that's pretty obvious, the acts of the sinful nature. And if you're sowing all of that into your life, jealousy, anger, dissensions, envy, drunkenness, sexual immorality, orgies, impurity. I mean, if you're just idolatry, worshiping things that aren't God, if you're just going to sow all of that into your life, why would you be surprised then that that is the fruit of your life? Destruction, broken relationships, emptiness. But he says, but the fruit of the Spirit, the power of God at work, is what is, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And that's the power of God at work. It is the only thing that is real power in life. Verse 12 of chapter 6 says that it's just, let me read a different translation. I'll pull that up here in a second. But it's just the reality that it's God at work in our hearts and our lives. I hear this a lot. It's like, hey, my faith got me through. And your faith is the starting point, but it's not the power. Like, you have to have a faith in what?
It's faith in the power.
In the power that's the Spirit of God in you that is at work. Like, my faith got me through. No, your faith didn't get you through. Your faith in God and God's power is what got you through. God gives us the desires and the power to do what pleases Him. He's the one that gives us
God
wisdom
gets
and
you through.
discernment.
The thing that you place your faith in is where the power is.
Bingo.
Yeah, it's.
But I think we stopped short on that. We're like,
for
it's
sure.
my faith.
You just
got
gotta have
prayers.
faith. Yeah,
my prayers did it.
You just gotta have faith.
Oh, yeah.
Praying
I
did
hear
it.
that a lot,
No,
prayer
it's-
really works. I believe in prayer. No, I believe in Jesus. Prayer
Yeah.
is the way to access what Jesus is able to do. Go ahead.
Because you can have faith in a lot of things, and your faith isn't going to get you through if it's not the power of the thing that you're placing your faith in.
Yeah.
And I think I appreciate what we're talking about, Scott, because I was just going to make this point. We're talking about this in kind of a grandiose type, in a ministry context and in a work context, right? Like a lot of people right now, I got to work. I just got to keep planting the seed. It's going to get better. But Paul's taking this and making it very, specific to who we are in our life and the fruit that we're, So I don't just want people to be hearing like, oh, okay, I got to keep chugging along in my family and in my thing and, in my relationships. All true, but Paul's pointing it really down specific to the things that we are planting in our lives, in our souls, in our being, and our flesh, and our sin nature and our spirit nature. What are we planting in? What are we receiving into our lives? What are we diligent to study and to think about the soundtrack that we're letting run through our mind, the words that we're saying, the words that we speak to ourselves, the things that are influencing us, the things that we're allowing to define us and be defined by. Paul's saying you have basically two choices. Within those two choices, there's a lot of other things, but you can plant seeds that are satisfying to your flesh and your sin nature, or you can plant seeds that are satisfying to your spirit and the Holy Spirit in you, and the fruit that you will bear are dramatically different. And so for me, again, going back to like what types of seeds am I planting in this season? What do I need to be focused on in who God wants me to be? And I was just talking to a parent the other day who was dealing with some stuff and talking about their kid and what they're doing and how that's working. And I just said, hey, just ask them types of questions about their future. What kind of person do they want to be? You know, you don't have to parent them and be like, here's what you need to do and here's what you're doing wrong. Just ask them questions and get them to start thinking, what type of fruit do you want in the next season of your life? And then make your decisions, plant your seeds based on those decisions, and get people to think through, I don't want to have terrible relationships in the future. Okay, well, how are you planting those seeds in the relationships you're in today? I don't want to be miserable in my future. I don't want to, be burnt out. I don't want to have a terrible job. I don't want to have, no friends or whatever it is. What seeds are you planting today then? If you say that's your goal, how are the decisions you're making today affecting those goals? How are those seeds that you're planting? And if you look at these lists, right, you're like, I don't want those ones. That's terrible.
No, nobody wants those ones. So if you don't want that, like if you want lettuce, plant lettuce.
Yep.
If you want wheat, plant wheat.
Yeah.
You'll get it. That's the maturing process. Kids do whatever feels good in the moment. Adults, like mature people, make a plan and follow it through. Like I want healthy relationships that are full of connectedness, not division. Great. I'm gonna work on being in right relationship with people, not just trying to always be right.
And again, back to my message that I spoke on this idea of we're training for that. There's a goal. I'm not just trying, right? It's got you're a marathon runner, an Ironman. If you just showed up and said,
not every day, not all the time.
No, every day. This morning you're wearing your running socks. You did a marathon this morning.
No, I am wearing my marathon socks. We were walking from our house, and we did do a marathon last year from our house. So 1 block away, the corner is the marathon start. So Amy and I ran together, which is what we do. We're sewing into our relationship running together. We ran 3 miles today. Well, 3.5. It's not a marathon. But we walked up. I was like, let's start the marathon start line. Right? And she goes, oh, well, you want to run a marathon today? And I'm always just like a lot of bravado and talk. I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. And I had the dog with me. She's like, your dog's ready? I'm like, oh, yeah, we'll go. No nutrition. We'll do a marathon. Blah, 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 blah. Like, right? But
you did a marathon.
We're not in a season of like sewing or we're not in a real strong season of like fitness right now. So we're not like looking forward to real harvest of fitness. But we're in a season of like we're bearing a lot of fruit in our business, and we've sown for 5 years into our business, and we're in a season where there's just like tremendous fruit, and we're just excited for that, and we're reaping that. But I say that to say maybe you're listening in. It's not just always I'm either sowing or I'm reaping. There's all these overlaps in the seasons of our lives, whether it's relationships with kids or with our spouse, with business, with hobbies or fitness, with the Lord, whatever you may be in, that we got to be kind of mindful of all of these different layers that we have going on in our lives. Like, okay, I'm working hard over here. Maybe you're starting a new career. Like we have a friend, which he's transitioning after 21 years being at a company this week. And he's not quite sure what he's stepping into next. But he knows he needs to step out of this and follow Jesus on this plan. And so it was brought up that like, hey, he needs to do something to ceremonialize 21 years at a company, and that's an ending thing.
I actually had a conversation with him Sunday about that.
Oh, you did?
Yep.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh, that's so good. I'm glad we're bringing that up and highlighting that as a significant thing this last week and modeling it, doing it, experiencing it, saying stuff about it. And so it's like, oh, hey, that's going to be beneficial. And so they're, in a season of like health family-wise, but then career-wise, like, okay, you're going to have to sew some stuff in. And you just never know what God's up to, and it always is surprising. So I guess I'm rambling on to say, hey, seasons are short. You never know exactly what season we're in. It could feel real like I'm sowing, and then God's so gracious. At times you're like, boom, there's fruit. You're like, oh my goodness, that came quicker than I thought. Well, it could be that, or it could be like, oh, God was doing stuff for a long time, and sometimes we just become more aware of it.
But again, the intentionality that Paul's speaking about, I spoke about this trying versus training. Like, if you want this fruit, if you want this result, there's a goal and there's intentionality behind training to make that happen. You don't just try to run a marathon. You could do it today probably, because I couldn't. If I went out and tried to run a marathon, because I haven't been training, and again, back to this conversation I had with this parent and all these types of things, like, if we understand the fruit that we want, or a goal that we want to have, we understand that, and then it's just like, meh. And I think a lot of people live this way. Oh, I hope that happens. That's really unlikely it's just going to happen if you just hope it happens, or if you just try to make it happen, if you just roll the dice. But if you're training for that, if you're saying, I'm going to be intentional and plant these seeds, because if I get here today, then I can get there tomorrow, and then I can take that step, and I can get there, and in the future, that harvest will be good because I'm intentionally training to make that happen, the results are crazy different.
Yeah.
You make a very good point, and as I'm listening to you guys talk about this intentionality, I'm thinking about when we travel. If I say, well, I want to go on a trip and my destination is such and such a city, then I'm going to get on Google Maps or whatever, and I'm going to look at various routes to get there, and I could fly, I could drive. If I drive, I could take this path or that road or this highway. And we kind of map out and figure out, all right, I'm here, I want to be there, and this is the route, this is the pathway to get where I'm trying to go. And we get very specific about that. Well, I'll go to this junction, turn left, and go down and pick up the highway and then go on to where I'm trying to go. People don't get specific enough sometimes. We don't get specific enough with our goals. Like, in 5 years is where I'd like to be, or in 10 years. So in order to get there, the steps that I need to take are X, Y, and Z, and the one I need to take right now is X, and I need to be very intentional, follow it up with Y and Z, or I'm not going to get where I'm trying to go.
Can you, for some of our younger listeners, can you just explain back in the day that you couldn't just go, oh, I need to get to Craig's house, my phone will tell me, right? Like, remember on a road trip when you had the map that you had to unfold?
I do
And
remember
you had
that.
to go,
Atlas.
what? We had, so my grandpa was a State Farm agent forever, and we had these big State Farm books that were, state maps, and I just remember it being so weird. Like, how do you even know where you're at? Like, okay, I'm on I-90, and I'm in between. Okay, this must be where we're at this point on the map. We're going to have to take some exit over here to get to this other highway, and you had to plan it out like that, and you had to be so much more intentional.
Yep.
Now it's just like, oh, well, Google tells me that it's 5 minutes quicker if I take this exit. Yeah, let's do that. But and I think that through that, the intentionality of going on a road trip. Okay, we want to get down to San Diego. Let's pull out the atlas. We could go this way. We could go this way. You don't have.
That's why there's mile markers on the side of the road.
Isn't that
Kids,
crazy?
listen in. They're like, oh, that's what those numbers are? That's how you would know. We're at 286. Oh, we're 13 miles. Yes.
Yeah.
That's how that would, you have to do math and
Right?
everything.
But the intentionality that it would take to go on a road trip to go, again, here's our destination.
Yeah.
But I think as people, though,
even with our apps today and technology, there's still intentionality that's required. We have to determine what the goal is. Like, the Google Maps doesn't make the decision for us. It's waiting for us to say, this is where I want to be. And then it will do some of the thinking for us and give us some options. But it's still the same process.
yeah, I think, Kyle, your questioning on that is good. Like, who do we want to become as far as the roadmap and the goal? I think sometimes we get a little too specific on maybe like a career. This is the status.
My 5-year plan.
Yeah, the status title I'm going for, or the position, or the salary number that I would arrive at. And Jesus is saying, well, no, who are you becoming? And I'm turning you into love, into peace, into patience, into kindness. I'm empowering you with my spirit to love God and love people. And in more of a directional thing, as far as like, if I'm a Christ follower, I want to be like Christ. And who is He? And therefore, how does it determine how I live? That's what should be my trajectory. To your point, Craig, we can break that down a little bit more and go, hey, I know I need to work whatever your thing is, right? A little more intentionality on, like, I have a tendency to flip the switch and get angry. Okay, God's making me into peace. All right, so how do I become more of kindness and peace in my life and my response to people, that's who I want to become. And if I sow those little seeds in tiny little conversations on daily level with my kids or with my spouse or with a coworker, friends, interactions at stores, that I just like, okay, I'm God, your power, your spirit in me, I'm peace. I'm becoming peace. I have kindness. So I'm going to live from that. And you choose those in that moment. Over time, it just becomes more of who I am and less having to work so hard. I can kind of reap that fruit of being a person of peace and of kindness because I've let the Holy Spirit do that work inside of me.
That's a really important emphasis, Scott, that when it comes to what really matters in life, it's not about what I accomplish or where I end up circumstantially. What really matters is who did I end up becoming? Mm-hmm. And as I get older, I'm realizing that really is all that matters. What kind of a man am I becoming? And if I keep going down the path that I'm on, what kind of a person will I be in 5 more years or 10 more years or 20 more years? If I, for example, am struggling with bitterness or resentment, and I just keep indulging that and keep going down that path, I'm going to be this cynical old person that nobody's going to want to be around. I don't want that. Jesus doesn't want that, so I need to make course correction now if that's something I happen to be struggling with. And selfishness, pride, it doesn't matter what it is. Issues in our life have a way of defining us, and we need to be intentional to deal with those things and be defined by the things that are the result of the Spirit's influence in our life.
And with those things that pop up, I mean, I think a great question to ask is, why is that there? If I have bitterness, if I have resentment, if I have a hurt, it's like more than the surface level. A lot of times there's a past pain, maybe something we didn't grieve well. I was just talking to a friend. He had to let someone go at his company who was a quality worker, just wasn't a great team fit, team culture, and wasn't willing to change. It was everybody else's problem. But like a solid, like quality can get stuff done kind of person, but wasn't able to manage people well and wasn't a good cultural fit and wasn't willing to change. And my friend was telling me that he had lost his adult son, and he said he hasn't dealt with that grief. And we are people, and so wherever we go, we show up with all of our stuff. So if you haven't dealt with the grief of loss of a loved one, you show up to work, guess what? That grief is there because you're there.
Yep.
And yes, we can kind of subdue it and kind of focus in on a task or whatever, but he was just saying, and I don't know the guy he's talking about. He was just saying he needs to be like he was saying in our Freedom Ministries grief share, he's like, he needs to be in one of those groups, and as an older adult, he's like, he needs to work through that because that keeps showing up, and it affected his job, and therefore it affected his ability to grow, and therefore he lost his position there. And he didn't take the time to memorialize and to do the hard work internally. Go, why is this anger keep popping up? Why is this I'm blaming other people? It's like, oh, there's something deeper that I need to allow the Holy Spirit to work through me and help me to heal from that, so that I can love God and love people better around me.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that kind of goes back to our seed and harvest. I mean, there's times that we're reaping these harvests of things. Maybe there's a seed that got planted in us through a life experience. I mean, to kind of maybe loosely use the metaphor that Paul's going off of. There's things that happen to us that are outside of our control that if not dealt with, they will take root in who we are, in our identity, in our character, in how we express ourselves to others. And you go, well, that's not really me. I don't know why this ugly thing is coming up. And it's like, yeah, because you didn't deal with this seed. You didn't get it out. You didn't ask God to, help you with it and to turn into Him and to start planting things of the fruit of the Spirit, of the Spirit of God to reap that fruit. And so it's like, yeah, I mean, we got to deal with that stuff. And we can't let that bitterness take root or that unforgiveness or that anger or these things. And so as much as, Paul is saying, hey, there's things that we're doing and there's choices we're making of the seeds that we're planting, there's also life and life experience and other people, and you had a hurt and you had a really big thing that was out of your control, but you never dealt with it. And
which is in your control, which is your part.
That's your part, yeah, absolutely. And so you're letting that seed take root, and you might even be wondering, like, I don't know why I feel this way. And, we deal with it now a lot with mental illness and depression and hurt and really the very far end of that because we just don't deal with it healthfully.
Yeah, and dealing with it and then just knowing, like, I've dealt with it and God has given me a sound mind. I have clarity of thought because I'm in Christ, and I have the mind of Christ because I'm sharing that with him. And because of Jesus, everything's working out for me today. That we would stand on that truth and know that, and not brush by doing the work, but know that I've dealt with it, I've done with it, and Christ has forgiven me for that sin. I've repented, I've asked for forgiveness from others, I've made amends as needed, and then I've moved along, and like Christ does, I'm moving past that because it's covered by the cross.
Both of you are touching on something that Paul addresses in the opening verses of chapter 6. In verse 2, he talks about the importance of each of us carrying our brother or sister's burdens. Bear one another's burdens. Carry each other's burdens, depends on the translation. And he says, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. So it's the Christ-like, it's the Jesus-like thing to do. We support one another. And you talked about somebody maybe needing to get into a group, and that's what groups are for. It's an opportunity for people to bear one another's burdens and help each other out and all of that. But then 2 verses later, he says, and then everybody should carry their own load. And it's like he's contradicting himself, and the problem there is the English translation doesn't capture what's going on in the Greek words. One is bear one another's burdens, which is a word that denotes something really large and more than one person can handle. And a couple of verses later, he says each one should be responsible for and carry their own load, and that's a word that denotes something that's manageable, that is our responsibility. So there's the part that's my responsibility. Nobody else should have to deal with that. But then life happens, and we get something that's just too much for any one person, and that's where we need one another. And maintaining that balance, realizing, okay, this isn't everybody else's fault. This isn't something that everybody else is going to fix for me. No matter what I do, they're just going to take care of it. No, I have a responsibility. I need to be responsible for the part that is my part. Everybody's obligated to do that. That's Paul's point. But he said, but then when things happen that are too much, then we need to step into one another's lives and shoulder the load for that season until it gets resolved.
Yeah, and that's why it's hard to know when those are overlapping, and when the line is like, is this my responsibility? Is this too much? Can I handle this? Not. Are you burdened too? Is that too big for you? It's small. Because what's too big for you is, manageable for others. And so that's why we got to, as Paul's saying, since we live by the Spirit of God, we need to keep in step with the Spirit of God and just ask for discernment, which is that God telling you in the quietness of your heart and your spirit and your head and going, yep, help the people. This is how you help them, not hurt. This is how you can help carry burden. And we just have to keep dynamic relationship with Jesus where we're understanding, I got to check in all the time. God, is this too much for me? Do I need to ask for help? Say, hey, this thing that's going on in my life is a little burdensome. Can you help carry a little bit extra load? Because I feel like I'm doing my weight, and then it's just kind of too much. So that we would keep in step with the Spirit is really, for me, the solution on that. Well, we're winding up for today, and so hopefully you've had enough garden and sowing and reaping talk. It's so funny. Our worlds are so different. We so much live in suburbia. You just run down to the store in Costco, and that's where the food comes from, and that's where the stuff comes from. But my friend, Farmer Kevin, on Sunday, he was like, hey, you guys want to go out with us? And they're like, no. He's like, I got to get up early, go to Billings. You have to go to Billings? Where are you going? And he's like, I got to pick up so-and-so. My son's coming. What are you doing in Billings? It's the National Barley Convention.
Yes, that's a good one.
He's
That's
a
a
farmer.
good
I
convention.
look forward to that every year.
He was jacked about it. He was going for like 3 days to Billings for the National Barley Convention.
The barley convention, that's good.
I said, okay. I said, how's the beer outlook? He's like, I'll let you know. So
That's funny.
The barley looks okay for next year. The brewers are going to have to work a little extra hard next year. So that's the initial report I got as of yesterday from the National Barley Convention.
There's some crazy folks there at the barley convention.
Because his life is he literally doesn't plant stuff, he doesn't eat, and he doesn't have a business. He has to sow what he's literally planted. So it's a funny world when we intersect with him.
But I think every preschool or kindergarten student put a seed in a cup, and put it by the window,
styrofoam cup,
and
watered it,
and gets the law of reaping and sowing, planting,
absolutely.
and harvesting.
They just didn't do it over like 4,000 acres.
Yeah, you just didn't do it on your giant property and didn't run some big machinery, but you put that little seed in there and you saw it grow.
Yep, and everybody who owns a cat knows that it's from Satan. So,
amen.
You know it. We know dogs go to heaven. So, anyways, thanks for tuning in on this episode. We got one more next week to wrap it up for the summer. So we will chat with you then. Have a great week following Jesus.
You can help people find and follow Jesus by subscribing to the podcast, sharing it with some friends, and leaving a review so it's easier for others to find it.